Please welcome your panelists for Hacked and Back, Cybersecurity Lessons from the C-Suite, moderated by co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of CrowdStrike, Dmitri Alperovitch.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming to this session where we'll talk about the lessons from the C-Suite, strategic and practical advice about what your organizations can do on this issue of cybersecurity. We're not going to delve into the technical details. This is focused on strategy, how your organizations can first prioritize your response to the threat, and what lessons you can draw from some of the leaders in this domain, from the hospitality industry, from the government, and the entertainment industry. So we'll start with quick introductions from the panelists. I'm Dmitri Alperovitch, co-founder and CTO of CrowdStrike, one of the leading cybersecurity firms, and
I'm Tom Pritzker. I wear a few different hats. I'm executive chairman of Hyatt. I actually spend most of my time in our family office acquiring businesses, and I'm chairman of CSIS, which is a national security think tank in Washington.
Chris Krebs with the Department of Homeland Security, and I run the Department's Cybersecurity and Critical Infrastructure Protection Shop.
Sandy Climan from Entertainment Media Ventures in Los Angeles. I used to help run CAA as well as Universal Studios, so we've seen the evolution of this from many points of view.
all right, thank you very much. Very illustrious panel with a lot of fascinating insights into this particular problem. To level set the discussion, I want to give you first a very quick overview of the threat landscape, what we're seeing out there. There are three types of actors that we at CrowdStrike categorize in this domain. First of all, you have the criminal groups that are mostly motivated by the financial aspect of these attacks. So they're targeting organizations to commit scams, to steal personally identifiable information that they can monetize, or go straight after credit cards or banking information. Then you have hacktivists who are targeting organizations purely for a particular vendetta. It may be personal, it may be a disagreement with a particular policy that the executive of that organization or the company is promoting. And then the last piece is you have the nation states, and there are a variety of different nation state actors out there that are incredibly capable in this domain, but the ones that we tend to worry about the most in the West are the top 4 countries that we also worry about in the physical world, which is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And what we've seen from an evolution perspective in the cyber domain is actually 3 types of generations of conflict that I characterize as the first phase being in the 1980s, sort of the first development of cyber offensive capability, and initially predominantly used by nation states at the time, predominantly Soviet Union and United States, and really leveraging it for espionage, targeting each other's government systems to try to steal information, to try to promote their national security purposes. That continued on through the mid to late 90s. And then we entered in the second phase of this activity, where you had a proliferation of actors emerge, more nation states starting to develop capabilities, but also criminal groups started appearing on the scene and realizing that they can make a lot of money in cyber. At the same time, some of the nation states that entered this domain realized that not only can you target government networks, but you can also target private sector networks. And China famously pioneered this with their massive intellectual property theft that they've been orchestrating for the last almost 2 decades, targeting organizations, stealing their IP, stealing their trade secrets, and then providing that information to their domestic sector, whether it's state-owned enterprises or private sector organizations with ties to the government. And for the last 7 or 8 years, we've entered a third phase of cyber conflict, where we moved from just theft of information, whether it's state secrets or company secrets, to disruptive and destructive attacks. We have seen attacks on Sony Pictures, of course, in this very town that we'll talk a little bit about later, that was very disruptive to that business and really psychologically impactful. But the most destructive attack we've ever seen actually occurred last summer. It was an attack called the Not Petre Attack, which the US government has recently attributed to the Russian government, and was an attack on a broad range of targets in Ukraine that then spread and targeted organizations in the West. And what's little known, and we're actually kind of breaking this news here at the Milken Conference, is that one of those targets was the Hyatt Corporation, and who happened to have a hotel in Kiev, Ukraine, where they first started to see the spread of this attack, were very rapidly managed to contain it and not suffer any damage. But the reason we know so much about that attack is because Hyatt worked with the government, worked with the private sector to let everyone know what was happening. and get the government and the private sector to quickly respond and start containing this issue. So my first question is going to be to Tom. Really, how's your thinking evolved on the issues of cybersecurity, and what changes precipitated at Hyatt specifically to get you guys to the point where when you see something as disruptive and destructive as a Not Petre attack, you mobilized your organization and you immediately said, we have to share this with the government, we have to share it with the rest of the industry?
Right. So thank you. So about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago at Hyatt, we started working on our purpose. We wanted to define our purpose and build our whole strategy around that. And we defined our purpose as caring for people, both colleagues and guests. At around the same time, I became aware of some of the cyber attacks that were going on, and when I put that through the screen of caring for people, boy, if we're not protecting our colleagues' information and our guests' information and they get hacked because of us, then we're not really executing on our purpose. So I then tried to move myself up the learning curve and basically think of it as 3 layers: corporate governance, my responsibility, defense, which we have a CISO and work with CrowdStrike, and then recovery. And we then I began to work on the corporate governance part of this. And we've developed an extensive layered system, is the way I'd describe it. So at the management level, we have a risk committee that meets quarterly and discusses cyber every one of those meetings. We also have a disclosure committee because we've got responsibilities to the SEC, and we've got to understand what those responsibilities are. So they both meet quarterly, and then they report out to the audit committee. Audit committee discusses cyber quarterly, and once a year does a deep dive where we'll spend 2 hours talking about cyber and how we're evolving in that whole area. And then that in turn goes to the board where we do it once a year in a deep dive and as part of our enterprise risk. We see cyber as one of our top 6 risks, and so it has a priority in terms of our conversations, our share of mind, that sort of thing. We spend about 6% of our IT budget in cyber. We have a CISO, and our general counsel is obviously well aware and triaging a variety of issues constantly. So that's sort of the governance side of it. In terms of the evolution of it, of our thinking about this, we become increasingly concerned as we watch what's going on in the world. And so I think one of the things that we've probably done well is because I'm interested in it, everybody in the company knows that I'm interested in it. It means the board's interested in it. And what that really does is it helps the CISO go across different groups within Hyatt and get their attention. So when he needs something out of marketing or loyalty or any of these different groups, what he tells me is he's able to get their attention because in effect, he's got cover from the top of the organization. And so that's sort of the framework and the layout of how we think about it and the building blocks that we've put in place. We work closely with CrowdStrike. We have some third-party vendors. What we're seeing is you don't have to be huge anymore and throw $1 zillion at cyber. You can, in effect, rent some of those capabilities at very acceptable cost levels. Next thing I'd say is, so we think about we have responsibilities to our customers and our colleagues, and it's both our customers and our colleagues. We have responsibility to our shareholders, and we feel we have a responsibility to society, to our country. The problem is those are often in conflict with one another. And how do you go about resolving the issue of, gee, if I do this for that group, I'm going to hurt this other group? And that's where judgment comes in, and that's where we want to make sure that we're using that judgment at appropriate levels. Do you want me to go into the Not Petre, or do you want to?
No, well, it would be great if you just explain your thinking, because what I thought you did in Not Petre was so unprecedented, where within literally 10 to 20 minutes of learning about this issue and figuring out exactly what was happening, your CISO made the decision, I assume with the collaboration with others in the company, to say, you know what, we're not going to keep this to ourselves. We're going to go to the world. We're going to tell them what's happening so that they can protect themselves.
So, better lucky than smart. we were looking, we not Hyatt, but our family was looking at investing in a cybersecurity startup at around, this is probably 3 months before Not Petre. So I was moving up the learning curve, and I was working with Hyatt CISO to get an education about this. So I was reasonably aware by the time Not Petre hit. And what happened, I think, was fantastic from a corporate point of view. What happened was a team came in, got word that we had been hit at the hotel in Kiev, assessed that the hygiene practices at the hotel in Kiev protected us. We had a recovery mechanism. We had a way to identify the virus. At the hotel level, we were in great shape. So now all of a sudden you don't have an immediate threat to the mothership. And what our CISO decided was, I'm curious to see what's the transmission vehicle for that virus. And we have tools in Chicago to look into that. He went, downloaded what was going on in Kiev, and used the tools and figured out the software that was the transmission for the virus, because he also saw at the same time his screens were screaming with information. Yours must have been, yours must have been. So he knew something was going on. And he then made the decision to notify that we were safe, therefore there wasn't downside for us in going ahead and telling others what we had discovered. And so he actually made the call. He talked to General Counsel's office first, said, what are my issues there? We organized around that. And so we very quickly were able to go to a series of places. We went to the FBI, we went to what's called trust groups, we went to Dmitri, and we said, this is software that people gotta be worried about. And what I actually really like about the story is that we didn't take the time to percolate all the way up to the CEO with the question of, should we go ahead and be transparent or not? We had enough confidence in CISO, his boss at IT, and the General Counsel's office to give them the authority to go and do that. We had talked a lot about this question of transparency, if we get hit, when we get hit, and how we might think about that. I can imagine you deal with this constantly. And this happened to be a situation where we were confident that we weren't hurt, that we hadn't been exposed. And so we went ahead, and we didn't, they did, and told the world what was going on very quickly. And I actually got calls from 3 different friends within 24 hours congratulating me on what we had done. It was very funny to me because it's obviously your world and your world, but it's not typically my world. But 3 different very interesting people called to tell me. One was the head of a major financial institution to tell me that we had done a good thing for the world.
So, Chris, I imagine you're sitting here with as much amazement as I am, because this just doesn't happen regularly. Most companies decide not to share because they're worried about the impact and the story in the headlines of your organization was impacted or was targeted by a threat actor, and they just want to have nothing to do with that. So when you work with organizations, what do you see typically, and how do you encourage them to do what Hyatt did and share this information so that the entire community of companies out there and the nation can be protected?
So I think what Hyatt did last year was obviously commendable and notable in that it historically has not happened a lot, but it's happening more. And there are a couple reasons for that as I see it. First and foremost, when you have leadership, C-suite leadership, that takes it seriously and drives a security-minded culture across the organization, and the CISO is then empowered to make decisions and drive security-minded outcomes across the organization, that tends to get you to the spot where you are notifying. The other aspect of this is it's the boards and it's lawyers. We've already talked a little bit about how when you do get popped, there is that kind of turtling mindset. We're like, well, hold on, we got to protect, we got to investigate, we got to figure out what's going on here. But what we're seeing is a lot more, because of the C-suite and the security-minded culture, driving more kind of left of boom, left of Not Petre, before the incident, more security-minded culture where the lawyers come in and say, hey, let's go work with the government. Let's go work with DHS. Let's go work with folks that can help us understand what our risk profile and our threat model is and start addressing that. So in the event a bad day does happen, they can point back and say, hey, look, we did the right thing. We worked with the government. We worked with Dmitri's company. We worked with these folks to get a better understanding, get our arms around the problem, and we still got popped. Now, what that tells me is that there's still a gap between commercially reasonable security investments and then military grade. Now, at the commercially reasonable level, you can probably push out a good bit of the cyber criminal activity. But when you talk about the big 4 nation states that Dmitri mentioned, you're really not going to be able to drive the security outcomes that are going to that keep the advanced adversary out. So how does the average publicly traded company that has to both make the investments to protect the stakeholders, but at the same time deliver some degree of value to their shareholders, how do you cover that gap? So where we're pushing out of DHS and working with some of the other interagency departments and agencies is this collective security mindset. No longer is it acceptable, in my view, for a company just to sit there and say, hey, we can't do anything, it's a nation state, it's Russia, it's China, it's whatever. So what we're encouraging is folks to come to us and say, hey, work with us, help us better understand what your risks are, what your vulnerabilities are, and then allow us as the DHS to pull together the aggregate risk picture for the nation and eventually for those countries that do want to be a part of this global community. And from there, we can actually make the policy decisions, the security response decisions that can help stabilize the global order. Because what we're seeing right now, what we've historically seen, is imperfect information leads to imperfect decisions. You wouldn't make an institutional investment without really understanding the risk of the organization you're investing in. Same thing goes for security at a national level. We need, as the government, to have a better picture of what's going on out there, but because of the underlying consequence, what's going on in Hyatt's networks, what's going on in other organizations' networks, because we don't really know that. We don't know what the adversary is doing. We can't help create a culture both on the Hill and across the administration to achieve this collective security mindset, to create the conditions where security is actually a priority.
So Chris, I get the reason why you would want that information to protect the nation. We have a lot of organizations represented here in the audience. What is the value to them? Because there is non-zero risk in going to the government and sharing this. We know information leaks. We know the media likes to make a lot of hay out of things that may not necessarily even be that important. So why would an organization go to DHS and work with DHS and share information about their vulnerabilities and their attacks when they know that there is some risk that might become public as a result of that?
So I already touched on this a little bit, but ultimately when the bad day happens, the FTC or other organizations are going to come calling and look at what you did over the last X amount of years to understand your vulnerabilities and understand your risk and push that risk down. to the extent you can point to the piece of paper that, hey, we worked with DHS, we worked to understand our vulnerabilities, and we made these investments, and we still got hit, there's a degree of kind of risk management built into that. There's some risk transfer. So that's one. There's another piece built into this or baked into this collective security model that fortunately, look, ultimately there's a degree of altruism here. It's how are we going to protect everybody else? There are big companies making big investments that have a significant amount of third-party risk. You're outsourcing everything from your IT to the management of your HVAC systems to someone else. So to what extent do you understand the risk management decisions that those other organizations are making? So to the extent that we can push out risk management information to help achieve better security outcomes, not just within Hyatt, but within your vendor set, that's going to get everybody, again, in this collective security mindset to a better outcome. And we have tools to help this, but I'll save the kind of the product pitches for the end. But look, I think there's this increasing awareness that we cannot do this alone anymore. We have a common adversary in these nation states, in these criminal organizations. Why the heck can't we work together better to push them out?
And Tom, what was the overriding factor for your organizations when you considered this this is why we want to tell the world what is going on? Is it the altruism? Is it the helping others? Is it thinking
Look, we had the luxury of all the stakeholders being safe, and so that gave us a real decision. For me, that's a reasonably easy decision in the sense of just what you're talking about. We need to be sharing this information in order to protect ourselves, right? Just greedy for Hyatt.
Right.
If we don't get an ecosystem going where there are these conversations, we're going to be more vulnerable. We are a target both of state actors and of criminals, and so we're really concerned about it. It's something that we care deeply about.
And as an aside, I can testify we work with numerous organizations in every single industry. The most targeted organization type that we discovered is actually the hospitality industry. You have the criminal groups that are going after them because of all the information and the credit cards that they have. You have every nation state that wants access to their guest list to figure out where their VIPs are staying. So it is unbelievable the amounts of attacks that we're seeing across the industry and across virtually every country where you have these hotels. But let me switch to the entertainment industry. And Sandy, we had this incredible incident that took place in 2014 where Sony Pictures was attacked by another nation state, North Korea, for a movie that they produced called The Interview, where the movie portrayed the assassination, fictional assassination of Kim Jong-un. And as a result, he got a little upset and took very destructive action against the studio and the employees. A lot of people don't remember this, but in addition to destroying with a massive wiper attack numerous computers across the studio, they leaked personal emails, not just about the executives, but the ordinary employees in this organization, and really terrorizing people. Their salary information, health information was out there for the world to see. So Sandy, how has that incident impacted the entertainment industry? What changes have you seen people start making as a result of that intrusion?
By the way, it's so great to listen, to Tom and Chris, because, the entertainment industry, it might not surprise you that it generally lacks the discipline of Hyatt or the sort of kind of concentrated government relationship of Homeland Security. And
That's why it's a more fun industry.
It's a very different industry. I mean, and it's when you think about it, and you think about what the interview and the Sony incident probably woke people up. But remember, you've got an industry that is very different in some ways than most industries. It's run by, although that's changing, there's a generational shift going on, a lot of technophobes. I actually know one studio head that actually used to fax emails because they actually didn't know how to use emails. And,
very safe, by the way.
And by the way, fax is just a wonderful word to use even today. But you've got an industry that has a different history. I mean, when you think about it, very product-oriented, in massive transition. Sometimes the leadership, unlike the Pritzker family, is much more short-lived in terms of their, their management of companies, their time in their roles. If you said CISO to many of the people I know, they would have no idea what you're talking about. And that, of course, is changing post-Sony. I mean, pre-Sony, if you think about, the most really fascinating thought is that, when you hit a bad quarter, and you thought about where to save money, you might cut your security budget. You might cut your cybersecurity budget. And that actually does happen. Let me see, am I going to spend money on marketing and save my job? Or where can I cut to hit my numbers? And cybersecurity. And it is a transition in thinking for a lot of the people in the industry that it is a C-level problem, a board problem, that you need a cyber risk strategy. But you also have an industry which is largely distributed. It has a history of intellectual property theft, and they think about it in that history, going back to people stealing reels of film out of theaters, DVDs, where you are in the chain. We think about it from the standpoint that as opposed to an annual need for cybersecurity, you focus on it when you're going to release a film or when Game of Thrones is coming back online. The reality is it's not at the moment that the product is available. It's a systemic, year-round, fully, encapsulated environment that you have to, keep innovating to protect your property. The other thing is you've got a workforce that is largely not, that's distributed. I mean, it's a lot of producers, directors, small companies working with large companies. People work from their own devices. Those devices are not generally protected. You don't generally train people in disciplines that a large company would. I mean, we have people, when in the Sony hack, and you look at the kind of craziness that people exchanged between each other on emails that made public, yeah, it actually traumatized the workforce. I mean, I've always inculcated to people, don't put something in an email you don't want other people to read. And yet, when the Sony, it was not just sharing information across the industry about the craziness of your colleagues and competitors. It was as if reality television had broken on the industry leak. And the industry itself, when you think about it, you've got people making product all over the world. You've got them linking into systems that are gateways into the large corporate system. It is very hard to train temporary workforces in disciplined anti-phishing. When you got John Podesta got phished. And the bottom line is I guess 90% of security breaches, I'm told, start with phishing. And it's looking very authentic. It's coming. You're getting 1 million emails a day. You're on the location. You're working 20 hours a day, and you have to make decisions. It's also a different industry from a number of other points of view. While Hyatt's a wonderful target, there's something really sexy about going after the entertainment industry, and a lot of other reasons for it. You've got news and information, you've got the Olympics and sports, you've got stars you don't like. Nation states look at the entertainment and information industries as proxies for our national government. You've got people who think it's really a wonderful thing to get famous by going after somebody who's that visible. I mean, think about, go back 15 years and 10 years and people who had the unfortunate idea of making sex tapes and then those getting, uploaded to the internet is sort of the children's version of where we are today. Exposing people you don't like. And on the other hand, you've got an industry that lives on schadenfreude, which is, as opposed to sharing, you've got people who, it's not just that I succeed, it's that my competitors fail and I look much better because it's a highly daily competitive industry. So I think where we're headed with it, is part of the large change that's happening in the industry. This is one of the most disrupted industries. It's certainly in the realm of disrupted industries. Entertainment's going to play a large part in the transition to ambient computing and the Internet of Things. That opens an entirely new world of breaches. The other thing is that entertainment is really the loss leader for the Amazons, for the Apples, for AT&T potentially, and as trusted brands like the Walt Disney brand expand into new areas, you are now tying the sort of vulnerabilities of the entertainment industry into retail and all the other allied areas that are going to be in that Facebook front face, Google front face, Amazon front face, trusted relationship with the consumer. And that intersection where these companies begin to come together is also going to force a discipline that should be there. I think that the leadership of the current leading companies is going towards where Hyatt and CrowdStrike have set the pace. But there are unique issues that have to be developed about protecting the industry, about workforce habits, about taking responsibility, understanding it literally from top and drilling it down, and then sort of coming out the other end in a world where, as we see new companies really in charge of our entertainment, that holistic world is better protected than we have seen it up till now.
So Sandy, I have to tell you, I had conversations with a number of executives in the film industry pre to Sony, and several of them had told me that we're not a bank, we're not a defense contractor, no one is going to come after us, security is just not that important. And as the industry has evolved now, as you said, from just IP generation into this massive data aggregation field where you have so much information that the Amazons of the world have, the Apples and so forth, are you seeing that change where they're starting to think, oh my God, I will be a major target for criminal groups, for nation states, activists, et cetera?
I think not just the entertainment industry, but in general, I think you see your own responsibility and liability as a senior manager, as a CEO, a C-level executive, and a board, is that as you see the potential of losing your job, you focus very clearly on the things you need to do. And the challenge in that is if you come out of the financial industry, the words conditional access are ingrained in your business processes. The problem is in the entertainment industry, what you have to wrestle with and truly embrace is ideas like conditional access, and how does that disrupt the creative process? How does that disrupt the creation of value?
Good. So Chris, the President nominated you to be the Undersecretary at Homeland Security, focused on cyber issues as well as some physical security issues. What are your top priorities in working with government agencies and private sector to shore up our defenses?
So two things right now. When I think about risk, when I think about cybersecurity risk, we're increasingly moving away from a individual target or individual company focused approach and more trying to sit back and understand what the broader national risk picture looks like. I've touched on this a little bit, but breaking it down to its constituent parts of consequence, threat, and vulnerabilities. Because when we talk about the media industry, the entertainment industry, and the hotel industry, they couldn't be more different in terms of what they're providing. But there are things that link them all together, and that's the underlying infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, the communications infrastructure. So what we're trying to do is really boil it down to what are those national critical functions across the United States and frankly globally that drive the economy, that drive the mission essential functions of the government. And it boils down to a handful of things, from keeping the lights on, the water running, and the banks clearing payments, every day at 4 p.m. We've really got to drive it down to a risk prioritization methodology. And the reason that I'm hitting so hard on this collective security model and sharing of information is because, again, imperfect information leads to imperfect decisions. Unless I really know what's going on out there in the electricity subsector or in the banking and finance sector, I'm not able to stitch together that picture and then work with the White House, work with the other agencies, work with the Hill to figure out, okay, what are the policy adjustments we need to make? What are the deregulatory measures we need to take in the event of a bad day? We've got to get that total picture together. The second piece is looking at the top down, the national critical functions. And then there's a bottom-up kind of raising the security baseline, which is just kind of DC, DHS, security speak for getting everybody the opportunity to be better at security. How do we enable the decisions that are being made across the country and in industry? They can actually make security investments. They can make security decisions. We're really trying to kind of drill down to what's the smallest number of players that can have an effect on the industry. And it's a Pareto principle, kind of the 20% have 80% of the impact on the field. But boiling it down to those ICT companies, bringing them all together and saying, here are the risks, here's the threat, what are the decisions we can make to raise security so that the end user, we're not playing whack-a-mole out in the hinterlands. So that all gets us to a spot, I think, where, again, the decisions that are being made across the C-suite are that much easier. But also the consumer can kind of go home and have some confidence when they pop open their laptop or whatever it is, and they can do what they need to do to pay the bills, browse online, whatever it is. Again, getting the conditions in the environment out there so that we have a stable ICT ecosystem.
So Chris, it's interesting. I had a lot of conversations with executives here at the Milken Institute conference, and many people, I was somewhat amazed to realize this, still think that the government is going to protect me from all these threats. They're literally asking me, whether you look at what was happening in the elections or where you see in attacks that you read about in the paper every single day against various companies like Equifax, they're saying, why isn't the government protecting us? And of course, the framework we have from a legal perspective doesn't necessarily allow you to protect the nation. You don't necessarily have that authority to protect Hyatt, to protect Sony Pictures and others. But talk a little bit about how you're thinking about that, because the expectation from the public, I think, is that the country is going to protect me against a physical invasion. They should be able to protect me against a cyber invasion as well.
So I do think it's still kind of early days in the cybersecurity space. I think we've been fighting, kinetic physical wars for millennia. We've been in this digital space for 15, 20 years or so. The laws and the patchwork of laws that we have built around how we engage in this space are outdated and need to catch up. I've got my own challenges within DHS. I have a very broad set of authorities in terms of collecting information, doing risk modeling, but I can't compel anybody to do anything. I have zero regulatory authority outside of a very narrow sliver of the chemical industry. But beyond that, I'm in a space where I have to provide something of value to get somebody to come on board. And we haven't had, frankly, as the education model is developing, as the awareness of the threat is developing, we haven't really refined down of what the requirement is, what's the demand signal coming from industry. And we are working really hard right now, making significant investments in terms of our stakeholder engagement, stakeholder outreach, our marketing plan. We have really good technical capability, but we need to up our game on the comms side. But from an authority space, I've got almost everything I need. The one thing I can't do, so I'm going to ask you, I am in charge of the National Protection and Programs Directorate. To me, that sounds like a Soviet-era military intelligence organization. Instead, it's this patchwork of programs at the Department of Homeland Security. For me to change my name to something that actually reflects, a branding of what I do, I have to go to the Hill, and Congress has to pass a law that will allow me to change my name.
So in about 10 years, we'll expect to see some change there.
We've been working on it for a couple of years. I think we got pretty close earlier this summer. My hope is that we'll get it done, but at the end of this Congress. But what we're trying to do is change the name to something that actually communicates to the stakeholders. So when I knock on a door and say, I'm with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, it's not the best brand name in the world, but hey, it's a lot better than the National Protection and Programs Directorate. Again, it kind of cuts down on the FUD, the uncertainty and the doubt of what I'm trying to do and what I'm all about.
But the one thing I'll say about this from the entertainment industry's perspective is, technology is a double-edged sword, and we tend to look at it in a very narrow way in the entertainment industry. And by the way, when I say it's a double-edged sword, the same 3D technology that will allow you to 3D print an artificial limb for a child will allow you to print an untraceable gun. So everything we do has a light and a dark side to it. In this area, what is fascinating is that we are moving into a world right now in the debate, and entertainment is a major part of it because it's sort of really the canary in the coal mine of how you do it. It's surveillance capitalism. Is what you're doing is you're basically out there collecting massive amounts of data, and you're trying to use it probably in an ideal world for white hat stuff. As Bill Gates was talking at Harvard, he said, I'd spend all my time in AI because all that data is going to make your life better and more creative and easier. And then there's the dark side of that. And from the entertainment industry's point of view, because it is at the forefront of these changes, is that they have to realize that, in our world, most of the people look at technology as a closed-ended decision. It's like I got a new version of Windows. Is that it's not a solvable problem, it's a process. And that process is a moving target, industry-wide, technology-wide, and purpose of why it's being done. And the collaboration between the government, which we tend not to trust at times, and we should trust it, and there needs to be that trust built. Companies like CrowdStrike, which are at the forefront of visioning where it's going, and the entertainment industry, which is at the forefront of where all the data is being used as sort of the loss leader collection agency for everything else, because that's why Amazon's moved from $500 million of production to $4.2 billion of production this year. Between Netflix and Amazon, they're spending more than the entire industry. And we have to find a comfortable way that we are not dealing with it as I can buy an off-the-box solution, but then I have a trusted relationship that actually visions where the bad hats are going. And when we've got advanced persistent threats, that our CEOs know what you're talking about, and that you are, skating, as used the hockey analogy, don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck will be.
Yeah. So Tom, as you're listening to Chris talk about his challenges, is there anything you would like to see from the perch you're sitting on from the government in this particular area?
Yeah. So Chris described, which is accurate, one of the benefits of working with the government is we can show that we were diligent in trying to build a protective area. But what we also need is help on the offense. That is information about things that you may know where we're a target. And we have this across a number of different agencies, as you can imagine. And we've got a legal structure that makes it very difficult for the government to share information with us. It's very frustrating. I mean, we have at times, for example, gotten a call from the State Department saying one of your hotels, we have information one of your hotels is the target of an attack. We go, great, which hotel? Oh, we can't tell you that. So you sort of look and say, okay. So yeah, to facilitate the sharing of information is, I think, a nut that we have to figure out how to crack. We were talking about earlier, so if there was a central place that you could go and say, okay, I've been hacked, and here's the profile of what that hack is, and that could be disseminated to other potential targets, seems to me we would cut down significantly on the scale of cybercrime. There are problems. What I just described has a whole host of problems attached to it, but either the government ought to be that repository, we've talked about that, and there's some risks around that, or set up an NGO to do it, but somehow this issue of more transparency or sharing is a big part of the answer from my point of view.
So I think what you highlight really are two things. One is security, classified information sharing, but also aggregation of risk data. On the security clearance front, and frankly, classified information sharing, there's no question that I think the system is probably broken and needs a lot of work. But I think in the last year, we have made significant progress working DHS with the intelligence community and law enforcement agencies like the FBI to bring down and declassify information quickly. I came from industry, the tech sector, have a significant appreciation for the value of that information, how it can make make better risk decisions at the industry level, and have committed to my team when I say we are going to get these things out, this information out as quickly as we possibly can to engage. On the second piece, the aggregation of data and that kind of some cloud effect almost that you're speaking to about how to pull everything together and get it out as quickly to other folks so they can protect themselves. We do have the authorities under the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act 2015 to serve as the repository, the hub for cyber threat indicators. We have some automated programs, the Automated Indicator Sharing Program that we've got, that we're improving on to pull information out. For instance, like if you were to share into that program, it would then go light up a bunch of other systems that are not DHS. It would go through DHS, but it would light up a bunch of other systems and protect them. And it does, kind of clean out the underbrush, clean out the known bad stuff. The issue, though, is that when we're told to go do something and compelled by Congress and statute, is we don't get a beta version. We don't get stealth mode startup. We have to implement within a 90-day period or 180 days, depending on what the statute says, and we have to roll it out and we have to improve on the fly. So I kind of boil my job right now down to 3 questions, and I'm stealing from Senator Tom Carper from Delaware, former governor of Delaware. But last week in a hearing to one of my coworkers, he said, I would always go out and ask 3 questions. 1, how are you doing? 2nd, how are we doing? 3rd, how can we help you? That's my mindset right now. I need more information on what's required to ensure that the services, the capabilities, the deliverables that I'm pushing out the door are actually addressing a need, because every person in this room that's a taxpayer, that's my responsibility to ensure that when I'm spending $1 out of my budget, that it's providing an effect and we are responsible stewards of the taxpayer's dollar.
I would also say that from my experience, there's a tendency on the part of industry to think that the government has this magical pot of gold of beautiful cyber stuff that you can just, if you can get you access to it and sprinkle on your systems, you would be magically secure. If they had that, they would be doing, frankly, a lot better job of protecting themselves. Secondly, I can tell you from my experience that on occasion they do have some phenomenal information, but a lot of times they don't. We were working on a very big and very timely case, very sensitive attack a little while ago, and I actually picked up the phone and called some very senior officials in the government and asked for help. This was a national consequence investigation.
Apparently I'm not senior enough because you didn't call me.
You weren't yet in your role then, but they did try to help. In all fairness to them, the bureaucracy started moving. They started working on declassification. It took about 12 hours, which, by the way, by government standards is light speed. But what we got back was one single IP address that we already had weeks ago. So a lot of times, I'm glad we tried, because who knows, they may have had something of value in that particular case. But a lot of times they just don't have as much as information as you might have, as you might think, to help protect you. But let's change topics for a second and talk about practical advice for executives. Tom in particular and others as well. I'd love to hear how you're thinking about metrics, measuring the success of your programs at the board level. What information do you expect from the organization to know, are we actually improving? Are we getting the right value for the money and the effort that you're spending in this?
So I went to the chairman of our audit committee some years ago, and he's a fantastic guy, and I said, you got to own this. I need you to own the cyber, because my own sense is the committees are wonderful. I need individual accountability and responsibility. So one of the things we've tried to do is have a specific person on the board who's working that. We also brought someone onto the board who is a techie, who's very knowledgeable, who does this for another major company. And interesting, he was not naturally senior enough. He's not a direct report to the CEO. He's second level, but from our point of view, he was going to function in a specific role, and it's been fantastic. In terms of metrics, where we currently are is we have 163 different metrics that the IT department uses to look at this. We obviously at the board level can't digest that, both technically and the volume of information. So we roll that up into what I'll call a pie chart. How many of those are still high-risk areas, how many are medium, how many are low risk. So in a simple form, we can see progress. And then the other thing we do is we lay out, here are the major initiatives that we're taking for the coming year, and there we can have a conversation around those initiatives to see that we're making progress. So that's where we are. I think that's going to evolve. I particularly in this whole area of cyber, I'm told we're good at it. I think it's at a nascent stage. I think we're going to see huge progress in terms of our level of sophistication of metrics and that sort of thing.
Well, I do have to tell you, as someone who works with thousands of companies, you are absolutely one of the best in terms of Hyatt. And I think a lot of it is because of the attention that you have from the top down on the organization on this issue. So, and you have phenomenal people. But Chris, I'm curious for you, as you think about metrics, both for, one of your responsibilities, protecting the .gov, right, the civilian part of federal government, and obviously the critical infrastructure. What do you look at when you go to Congress and ask for more billions of dollars in budget to help deliver your mission? How do you justify, are we improving? How do you measure that?
So a couple different angles to this one. First and foremost, we're just trying to get a broad sense of what the networks, the enterprise networks look like across the civilian agencies. That has been a challenge historically because they are decentralized in a bit of a federated model where every agency is budgeted differently, every agency has to deploy differently, they have different customer requirements. What we've done over the last couple years is work with Congress. We've got a program called Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, which allows us to deploy some sensors and get a broader understanding of, okay, what's the level of health across these agencies? Where are they patching? What are the systems that they've actually got deployed? And in some cases, the operating assumptions that we had before we moved to this centralized approach were completely blown out of the water. There were some cases across agencies where they had 200% more devices connected to their networks than they thought. That's a problem. That is some shadow IT right there.
How many of them were controlled by adversaries?
No comment. So first it's getting visibility, but we also have some other mechanisms, some more extreme mechanisms called binding operational directives. We can issue binding operational directives to compel certain activities across civilian agencies. One of those that we issued in 2015 was time requirements for patching critical vulnerabilities. Prior to the binding operational directive, that one at least, the average patch rate was for a critical vulnerability was well over 45 days. There were 300 plus open, if not 400 plus open critical vulnerabilities. Within about a year, maybe even half a year of having this binding operational directive in place, we were down to under 100 CVs, if not more. Plus, we'd gotten the time to patch, well under 30 days. In some cases, we're talking 8 to 9 days from the release of a critical vulnerability. So we're taking a look at, what is the time to patch right now, but most importantly, what we're trying to get our arms around is what is the security value of patching quickly? We all believe that it gets us a better security outcome, but what we need to get our arms around is dwell time. So what is time to detect the adversary on the network, the time to investigate, and then the time to mitigate, to drive them out. So if we can have that understanding of here are the things we're doing to improve the health of our networks, and here's the things we're doing to figure out what the bad guys are doing, and does an extra dollar here get me the desired effect over on this side? Because if it's a one-to-one, frankly, I'm not sure that's where the best value is spent. What we need to get is more into points of leverage. The New York State Cyber Task Force issued a report last fall, and that's really the concept here of leverage. What are the things that get us minimal investments with huge outcomes? Windows Update is a great example. You push an update, and you can patch millions of devices across the globe. That is leverage. So we need to get more of an understanding of where that single dollar gets us an amplification of 100 to 1, for instance.
And Chris, as you know, I love those three metrics: the time to detect, time to investigate, time to remediate, because a lot of what we try to do in cyberspace is really about that speed of response, speed of containment. At CrowdStrike, we track something called the breakout time. The time that it takes on average for an attacker who manages to compromise a system within your organization. They got someone to click on a link, they found a vulnerability, they exploited it, to the time that it actually takes them to break out of that beachhead that they've established, that one machine they managed to hit, and actually get to other systems within the network that they actually truly want, whether it's to disrupt them, like with a Not Petre Attack, or to steal information from those systems. And on average, across all the actors that we track, whether it's nation states or criminal groups, it takes 1 hour and 58 minutes, almost 2 hours, for them to achieve that breakout time. So for all those people that you hear talk about cyber moves at the speed of light, that's nonsense. There are people on the other end. They need to figure out where they are, how to conduct reconnaissance, how to get to the systems that they really want. That takes time. 2 hours is not a lot of time, but it is enough time for you to respond quickly. And the things that we certainly recommend to organizations to do with those three metrics is try to detect in under 1 minute, try to investigate in 10 minutes, try to eject them from the network within 1 hour. And if you're doing that, you're going to be able to contain them, stop them at that beachhead, not allow them to spread, and mitigate the breach.
You know, the interesting thing is, in the entertainment industry, where the puck's going, that is on steroids. Because, you know, you're dealing with a communications platform, and we have not yet seen what an infiltration of a communications platform and how rapidly information or disinformation, some of which may be public, some of which may be individually targeted, can create mayhem at just the right time and in just the right way. And the response time is got to be immediate, or you're going to have havoc. You're going to have panic in the streets. You could have elections swayed. You can have civil unrest incited, and we don't know what those tools are. I mean, you know, one of the hopes that I have for the entertainment industry, which is different than other industries, is that we are storytellers. And ultimately, we have a population that looks at this in a movie way, and many of the executives still look at it in a movie way. But we can use that to a positive way, which is to tell stories that actually educate, prepare, and make a more literate and technologically and cyber-secure population our ally in this.
All right, so just in a little bit of remaining time we have left, last question to all three panelists, really quickly. What are the top 3 things that you would recommend, you would advise your peers, your other executives and board members across the industry or across the government to do to shore up their defenses, to do better in this space? So, Tom, maybe we'll start with you.
I do tone at the top, some of the stuff I've talked about. I would do KPIs, measurements, and I'd do budget. Make sure that your team has the budget they need, and it's not that much money. This is the important change to me that's happened over the last several years.
Maybe I would add, based on what I've heard you speak earlier, empowerment, right? Authorizing your CISO to take decisions without going all the way up the chain and allowing them to make decisions quickly. That's great. Chris?
Agree with all that. I'd add on top of it, collaborate, work with the government, help us understand what your pain points are. Don't assume that we have all the answers. Help us understand what you need, and that can drive better policy outcomes, better legislative outcomes, better overseas security outcomes. But you got to tell us what you need, because I'm telling you right now, we don't have all the answers.
What I would say is very simple. Look to other industries for best practices. Take them, adapt them appropriately. And what I would say, which is not unique to the entertainment industry, but very visible, we're at a moment where we're basically resetting how people work with each other, whether that's the Me Too movement, gender equality. Frankly, taking this issue and adding it to the re-education of the workforce and to sort of layer in, you know, the true value-driven human elements that we need in a world that delivers human stories is critical.
Well, we're exactly out of time. Please join me in thanking this illustrious panel. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job.
It was great.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.